Watchdog files a lawsuit against the NOPD and Chief Ann Kirkpatrick after public records requests were denied or ignored by the department.
The lawsuit was filed yesterday by Charles Skip Gallagher in Orleans Civil District Court. Gallagher says the batch of unfulfilled public records requests included in the lawsuit include matters of public interest related to untested DNA kits and investigations into police misconduct. If granted, the court order would compel the department to release documents related to the public records requests that Gallagher says were either denied or completely ignored. Gallagher released a statement about the lawsuit saying the city seems determined to withhold legitimate public records requests to avoid the consequence of their release. Public records laws were enacted to ensure public officials cannot hide behind a veil of secrecy. These records should be released in a timely manner, not months or years after my request is made.